The Lego Movie was one of the biggest surprises of 2014 cinema. My first impression when it was announced was that it was just some kind of shameless attempt to cash in on the movie market by the Danish toy maker. However, it actually turned out to be one of the best films of the year and remains one of my favourite animated flicks. The Lego Batman Movie is the first of this year's 2 spin-off Lego movies, and although Batman was one of the main characters in the Lego Movie, Lego Batman pretty much ignores the previous feature completely, and bar a few uses of the term Master Builders and a reference to the Endless Void, you don't need to have any prior knowledge of the Legoverse to be able to enjoy this film. However, it is recommended that you do have a somewhat decent knowledge of Batman's history. And that's because although as expected there are a ton of jokes throughout Lego Batman that are clearly aimed at children, there are also a lot of very clever jokes that poke fun at Batman's past. I mean, Adam West's shark repellent even manages to make an appearance in this movie. Mr. Freeze also happens to sound like Arnie's awful rendition and even cracks a typically terrible pun or two, and Bane has that weird posh British accent that he does in The Dark Knight Rises. There are also many other clever little nods and gags included that I won't spoil, which are sure to please Bat fans. Unfortunately, whilst Lego Batman does a very good job when it comes to delivering fan service, the pacing is what ultimately lets the film down. The movie opens with an eye-popping set piece in which the Joker hijacks a plane full of explosives, an obvious nod to the Nolan films, before he and nearly every Batman villain imaginable, including more obscure villains such as Calendar Man and the Condiment King, have a huge brawl against the Cape Crusader. And yes, there's actually a real Batman villain called the Condiment King. I know, I can't believe it either. I'll admit I found this opening sequence to be highly enjoyable, but my problem lies in that there's just far too many similar set pieces throughout the film. Whilst I understand that this is a movie mostly aimed at hyperactive kids who probably have the attention span of goldfishes, which is likely why the movie jumps from one action sequence to another so quickly, from my perspective I found each ensuing sequence to be more and more tedious. Take the film's final battle for example, which throws together a ton of DC characters as well as a ton of characters from completely different universes into a huge final showdown. It should have been the highlight of the film, but because I was subjected to so many battles and fights throughout the movie, quite frankly I just wanted the whole thing to end. It feels as though the Lego Batman movie peaks too early, after which it becomes a bit of a drag. In regards to the narrative itself, I found the relationship between the Joker and Batman, which is one of the main focuses of the movie, to be presented in a very unique, funny and clever way. There were also certain specific aspects of the story that I quite enjoyed. For example, Joker's plan of handing himself into Batman in order to pursue a much larger goal, which I won't spoil, is such a good idea that I would happily see it done again in a live action Batman film. Despite this, I found that the film as a whole just felt kind of soulless and lacking in heart. When looking at 2014's The Lego Movie in its simplest terms, it's essentially a movie about the relationship between a father and his son. The entire film can be seen as just a story that the son is playing out in his mind when playing with his father's Lego. The evil Lord Business, who is obsessed with controlling the population and keeping everyone in their place, is the child's representation of his father who refuses to let him play with his Lego collection. It's essentially a story within a story and is a much smarter film than most people recognise it as being. The Lego Batman Movie on the other hand attempts to pull at the heartstrings in a similar vein to the Lego Movie by having the idea of belonging to a family as one of its key themes. Disappointingly, it just doesn't feel anywhere as near as effective, and the whole concept comes off feeling rather cringeworthy. I think that part of the reason for this is that there just isn't enough time spent with the characters away from the action sequences to enable them to become really likeable. Come the end of the film, I don't think I really cared about anyone. Or in addition, although I know that Batman being a complete dick is part of the joke, it still doesn't stop the fact that it gets boring quite quickly, as does the constant barrage of poor attempts at humour which sadly far outweighed the actual decent jokes in the movie. If I were to compare the Lego Batman movie to a classic Batman villain, I'd have to choose Two-Face. On one hand, it does have some very clever jokes and references that relate to the history of Batman and DC, as well as impressive action sequences and a pretty decent narrative, whereas on the other hand, a lot of the jokes fall flat, the film's pacing is horrible, and none of the characters are really likeable. I didn't find the Lego Batman movie to be terrible, instead the whole thing just felt kind of average. Despite this, I'm sure that kids will still love it. However, unlike the Lego Movie, it might not be a film that is a hit with both kids and adults alike.